Emily sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by colorful decorations, balloons, and glittering party supplies. Her small hands carefully folded the corners of the invitation cards, her face beaming with excitement. This was more than just a birthday for her, it was a chance to celebrate, to feel like a normal child, and to invite her friends over for the first time in a long while. With her disability, Emily didn't often get the same experiences as other kids, but today was different. Her mom, Sarah, hummed a tune as she hung a banner across the room, her eyes constantly flicking to Emily with a proud smile. "You're going to have the best party ever, sweetie," Sarah said, adjusting a balloon. Emily nodded, her wheelchair positioned in the center of the room, eyes wide with anticipation. "I can't wait, Mommy," she replied, her voice soft but filled with hope. Sarah's heart swelled with joy, but there was an undercurrent of worry she didn't voice. She had made every effort to ensure this birthday would be perfect, but she knew the rules. The HOA, and especially the president, Karen, had a habit of imposing strict regulations on everyone in the neighborhood. They could be the smallest things, like where you could put your mailbox or how many decorations were allowed outside for a holiday. But today, Emily's party was her focus, and nothing was going to ruin it. Just as Emily placed the final stamp on the last invitation, the doorbell rang. Sarah's stomach tightened, and she knew it was probably Karen, the HOA president, with some new regulation or complaint. Sarah opened the door, and sure enough, there stood Karen, her arms crossed, with an expression that was more business than friendly. "Sarah," Karen began, her tone sharp, "I just wanted to remind you that any events held in the shared community space need permission from the HOA board. You didn't ask, and without approval, your party isn't allowed." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you mean? It's just a small party for Emily. We're not causing any trouble," Sarah tried to explain, but Karen cut her off. "It doesn't matter," Karen snapped. "You need permission. It's in the rules." The weight of Karen's words hung in the air, and Emily, from the other room, glanced up, hearing the tension in her mother's voice. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, the joy she had been feeling drained by Karen's cold, authoritative stance. The dream birthday she had promised her daughter was suddenly on the line. Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest as she stood in front of Karen, who was now firmly planted in the middle of the community's tiny HOA office. The walls were lined with dated flyers, a few sterile potted plants, and framed rules that seemed to stretch for miles. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but Karen's cold eyes, fixed on her, sent a chill through her body. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This wasn't just a confrontation about a party. This was about Emily's happiness. "I'm sorry, Karen, but this doesn't make sense," Sarah said, her voice barely steady. "It's just a small birthday party. We're not breaking any major rules. No one is going to be disturbed." Karen's lips curled into a thin, dismissive smile. "The rules are the rules, Sarah. I'm just here to make sure everyone follows them. You should have asked for permission. You know that." Sarah swallowed hard. She had heard about Karen's strictness before but never imagined she would go this far, especially when it came to something as harmless as a child's birthday party. "But Karen, this is Emily's birthday. It's a special occasion. You're saying she can't even have a few friends over to celebrate?" Karen crossed her arms, a sign of her authority, and leaned back in her chair. "It's not about the occasion, it's about the rules. This isn't a few friends over. You've got balloons, decorations, an event planned for the entire afternoon. And don't get me started on the noise complaints. What if your party disturbs other residents?" Karen's voice was icy, completely lacking in empathy. Sarah could feel her anger starting to rise. The audacity of Karen to treat her daughter's birthday like it was some kind of disruptive, illegal gathering, it was infuriating. She clenched her fists, trying to keep her voice calm. "I spoke to several of our neighbors, and no one has a problem with the party. They're all supportive. Karen raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. That doesn't matter. You still need permission from the HOA board, and you didn't get it. I'm afraid it's not allowed. But no one else is ever asked to do this, Sarah said, her voice shaking with frustration. People have parties here all the time, and they never get questioned. Why are you singling us out? Why my daughter? Karen's face hardened. It's not personal. It's about maintaining order in this neighborhood. You have to learn to follow the rules, or things start getting out of hand. I'm not going to let you bend them just because it's your daughter's birthday. Her words were delivered without any trace of compassion, as though they were nothing more than a matter of fact. Sarah felt the breath catch in her throat. Was this really happening? Was Karen really denying her daughter the one thing she had looked forward to for months? She could see it all, the decorations, the laughter, Emily's smile. All of it slipping away with each cold, calculated word Karen said. Please, Sarah said, her voice cracking as she fought to keep her emotions in check. This party means everything to her. It's the first time she's ever been able to invite her friends over. You're going to ruin it all over some ridiculous rule? Karen didn't flinch. I'm doing my job, Sarah. If you want to make an exception for this party, then I'll be setting a dangerous precedent. Who knows what will happen next? We can't have that. Sarah stood there, feeling defeated. She looked around the small office, hoping for something to change, an ally, a sign of mercy, but Karen's posture, her cold indifference, crushed any hope of that. The woman didn't care. I'm sorry, but the party can't happen, Karen said, her voice final. I suggest you start calling your guests and let them know. She stood up from her chair, signaling that the conversation was over. Sarah's heart shattered. The tears she had been holding back began to threaten, but she fought them down, not wanting to show Karen just how deeply she had been affected. She wasn't going to give Karen the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. But it was hard, so hard. The one thing she had promised Emily, the one thing she had worked so hard to make happen, was now slipping through her fingers. As Sarah turned to leave the office, her mind raced. She couldn't accept this. She couldn't let Karen win. Not like this. Not when her daughter's happiness was at stake. But as she walked out of the door, she felt an overwhelming sense of powerlessness. Karen had won this round, but Sarah wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not ever. Sarah stood in the living room, her arms wrapped around Emily as the little girl's soft sobs echoed through the otherwise silent house. The birthday decorations that had once filled the space with excitement now seemed like a cruel reminder of what could have been. Emily's wheelchair was parked by the window, the streamers and balloons that adorned the walls looking like they might fall at any moment, weighed down by the heavy silence in the air. Sarah gently stroked Emily's hair, trying to soothe her, but the words she'd heard from Karen kept ringing in her ears. It's not allowed. You didn't ask permission. The rules. The cruel, cold rules that had robbed Emily of her one chance for a normal birthday. Sarah could feel her own frustration building. This was supposed to be Emily's special day. The one time where she didn't have to worry about being different. Yet, here they were, trapped by a woman who seemed to have more power than anyone should have in a neighborhood. Emily's voice broke through her thoughts, barely a whisper. Why can't I have a party like everyone else, Mommy? The question cut deep, and Sarah felt the sting of tears in her eyes, though she fought them back. You can, sweetheart, Sarah said, her voice cracking with emotion. It's just that, there are some people who think they can control things they shouldn't. She kissed Emily's forehead, wishing there was more she could say, but the words felt hollow. How could she explain to her daughter that the world wasn't fair? That sometimes people in positions of power use that power to hurt others? Emily didn't understand any of it, and how could she? She just wanted a birthday, a chance to feel like everyone else. Sarah glanced around the room, the once bright decorations now a symbol of failure. She tried to force a smile, but the weight of the situation made it impossible. "We'll figure something out," Sarah said, more to herself than to Emily. But deep down, she didn't know how. The sinking feeling in her chest told her that Karen wasn't going to back down, and the idea of having to explain to Emily that her dream party was now a broken memory was unbearable. After a few minutes of comforting Emily, Sarah wiped her own tears and made a decision. She would talk to the neighbors. She would find someone who would stand up with her, someone who could help challenge Karen. There had to be at least one person in this neighborhood who was tired of Karen's reign of control. She went door to door, her heart sinking with each unanswered knock. The few neighbors she did speak to were sympathetic, but each one quickly backed away when the topic of Karen came up. "I wish I could help," Sarah, one said, looking nervously over her shoulder as if Karen might appear out of nowhere. "But you know how it is with Karen. She has everyone wrapped around her finger. We can't risk it. She's not even following the rules herself," another neighbor, an older man named Mr. Wallace, said quietly. "But, if I speak up, she'll make my life miserable. She has connections, you know." Sarah's stomach twisted as she realized the depth of Karen's control. It wasn't just about the rules, it was about fear. Karen had instilled fear into the entire neighborhood, using her position to manipulate everyone into compliance. Sarah's last visit was to a family with 2 young children who Emily had been looking forward to inviting. When Sarah arrived, she was met with polite smiles, but the moment the conversation shifted to the party, the smiles faded. "I'd love to help," the mother said hesitantly, "but I can't afford to get on Karen's bad side. She has a way of making life difficult for anyone who stands up to her." Sarah stood there, feeling the weight of the realization crash down on her. No one was willing to help. Not even the people who had been Emily's friends. Not even the ones who had seen the joy on her face when she talked about her party. It was as if Karen had managed to choke the very spirit out of the neighborhood. Sarah's hope had shattered completely. She returned to her house with a heavy heart, knowing that without support, without a way to fight back, there was no chance of making Emily's birthday anything close to what she had dreamed. She closed the door behind her, her mind spinning. The broken decorations mocked her from every corner of the room. The dream that she had once held onto now seemed like a distant memory, slipping further away with each passing minute. Sarah sat in her kitchen, staring at the pieces of paper scattered across the table, notes from her conversations with the neighbors, all marked with frustrations and resignations. The weight of the last few days had worn her down, but she wasn't ready to give up yet. She couldn't let Emily's birthday be taken from her without a fight. The more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't do it alone. Karen might have control over the neighborhood, but surely there had to be others who were just as tired of her reign of terror. She couldn't just sit back and let Karen win. The idea began to take root in Sarah's mind, slowly turning into something she knew she had to act on. She grabbed her phone and started making calls. The first person she called was Mrs. McAllister, a widow who lived 2 doors down. Sarah had spoken to her many times before, and she always seemed kind-hearted, though soft-spoken. Mrs. McAllister picked up after the second ring. "Hello, Sarah. Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "I need your help, Mrs. McAllister. Emily's birthday is ruined because of Karen. And I don't think it's right. Karen's been using the HOA rules to push everyone around, and no one's standing up to her. I want to change that. I need your help to organize a community meeting." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sarah could almost hear Mrs. McAllister thinking it over. Finally, she responded, her voice quiet but determined. "I don't want to see anyone hurt, Sarah. You know how she is. But, this isn't right. If you think we can stand up to her, then I'm in. I'll talk to some of the others." Sarah felt a rush of relief flood through her. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She hung up the phone and immediately dialed a few more numbers, reaching out to those she had spoken with earlier. One by one, people agreed to join her cause, offering their support, albeit cautiously. No one wanted to risk angering Karen, but slowly, the small whispers of rebellion began to grow into a louder, more united force. Later that evening, Sarah walked down the street to meet with the others. They had agreed to meet at Mr. Wallace's house, the one neighbor who had spoken up earlier, though he had been reluctant to act alone. When Sarah arrived, she was greeted by the sight of several familiar faces gathered in the living room, each of them looking hesitant, but also determined. Mr. Wallace was the first to speak. "I don't know how far this will go, Sarah," he said, his voice heavy with doubt. "But we can't let Karen push us around anymore. I'm in." Sarah smiled, grateful for the support. "We're all in this together," she said. "This isn't just about a birthday party. This is about standing up for what's right. We've all been living under her control for far too long. It's time for a change." The others nodded, some with more enthusiasm than others, but they were all there, united by the shared frustration of being oppressed by Karen's authority. Sarah's plan started to take shape as the evening wore on. They would gather as many neighbors as they could to attend a community meeting, where they would voice their concerns about Karen's abuse of power and demand a fair and democratic process within the HOA. Emily's birthday would be the catalyst, but it would be bigger than that. This was a fight for their freedom to live without fear of retribution. The plan was simple, yet risky. They would all attend the next HOA meeting together, stand firm in their demands, and if necessary, go public with their grievances. The sense of fear that had been instilled in them by Karen was slowly being replaced with a flicker of courage. The more Sarah spoke, the more she saw others' expressions shift from doubt to determination. It was still unclear whether they would succeed, but Sarah had already taken the first step. She wasn't backing down. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The idea of standing up to Karen, of challenging the very system that had held them all hostage for so long, felt empowering. As Sarah walked back home that night, she felt a sense of purpose for the first time in days. The road ahead would be tough, and Karen was not going to give up without a fight, but Sarah knew that this was the only way forward. Emily's birthday might still be in jeopardy, but now, for the first time, Sarah had a real chance at winning back their lives. The HOA meeting was held in the small, sterile community center, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as a handful of neighbors filled the room. Sarah stood near the back, her palms sweating as she tried to calm her racing heart. She wasn't sure if she was more nervous about confronting Karen or about the possibility that they would fail to win the battle for Emily's birthday, or fail to expose Karen's iron grip on the neighborhood. She had gathered a small but determined group of neighbors, each one of them equally fed up with Karen's oppressive reign. As Sarah looked around the room, she saw familiar faces, neighbors who had silently endured Karen's demands and rules for years. Now, they were here, ready to take a stand. The tables were set up in the middle of the room, with a few HOA board members sitting at the front. Karen was at the head of the table, her sharp eyes scanning the room with an air of authority that made Sarah's stomach churn. Karen had always carried herself with a smug, almost condescending confidence. Tonight, however, Sarah could see the tension in her body language, the subtle stiffness in her posture as she prepared for the showdown she knew was coming. "Let's get started," Karen said, her voice commanding, though there was an edge to it, betraying the slightest bit of nervousness. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward, her heart pounding. She wasn't just fighting for a birthday party anymore. She was fighting for their community, for the right to live without fear of retribution. "I'd like to address the issue of the birthday party," Sarah said, her voice shaking but determined. "This isn't just about one day or one party. This is about fairness. This is about the arbitrary enforcement of rules that are hurting our children and families. Emily, my daughter, has been looking forward to this birthday for months. And now, thanks to Karen's strict interpretation of the rules, her special day is being ruined." Karen's face hardened, her lips pulling into a tight line. "I've explained the rules many times, Sarah," Karen said, her tone dripping with condescension. "The HOA board has specific guidelines for events in the community space, and your party doesn't meet those guidelines. It's really as simple as that." "It's not that simple, Karen," Sarah countered, her voice growing stronger as she felt the support of her neighbors behind her. "What about the other parties that happen here? What about the neighbors who get together and don't have to jump through hoops to get approval? Why is my daughter's birthday treated like it's a crime?" Karen's eyes flicked to the other members of the board, who sat there quietly, unwilling to make a move. Sarah could tell they were all scared of Karen, scared of challenging her, scared of what might happen if they stepped out of line. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "I'm not going to discuss this further," Karen said sharply. "You should have followed the proper procedures, Sarah. End of story." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as Sarah fought to keep her emotions in check. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. "We have the right to ask questions, Karen," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We have the right to challenge these rules. And we have the right to stand up to you. You've been using your position to intimidate this community, and we're done with it." A murmur of agreement spread through the room as Sarah's neighbors began to speak up. "She's right," Mr. Wallace said, his voice gruff but strong. "We've all been afraid to say anything because we didn't want to upset Karen. But enough is enough. I've had enough of her rules controlling my life," said Mrs. McAllister, her voice trembling with emotion. "This isn't just about one party. It's about how she's made all of us feel powerless." The room began to buzz with voices, neighbors exchanging looks and nods of agreement. Sarah felt a surge of hope flood through her. For the first time, it seemed like they were all on the same side. But Karen wasn't backing down. "This is absurd," Karen said, her voice rising in anger. "This is my neighborhood, and I'm the one who makes the decisions. You all should be thanking me for keeping things in order." Her words were sharp, and Sarah could see the cracks in her composure. She was starting to lose control. "You don't get to control people's lives, Karen," Sarah said, her voice steady, though the anger in her chest burned hotter with every word. "You don't get to ruin my daughter's birthday just because you can. You've been using your position to manipulate people for far too long, and we're not going to let you do it anymore." Karen stood up abruptly, slamming her hand on the table. "Enough. I won't tolerate this disrespect. You have no idea what I've sacrificed to keep this community in check. You all owe me your gratitude." "No," Sarah said, stepping forward, her voice rising in defiance. "We owe you nothing. You've abused your power, and you've hurt our families. You owe us an apology." There was a tense silence as the room waited for Karen's response. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment, the anticipation of what was about to happen. For a moment, Karen stood frozen, her face a mix of rage and disbelief. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but full of venom. "You'll regret this," she spat. "I'll make sure of it." But Sarah didn't flinch. "We're done being afraid of you," she said quietly. "And we're not backing down." The room was still, but a sense of triumph began to fill the air. Sarah's neighbors were no longer cowering in fear. They had found their voices, and they were ready to fight. With Karen's face flushed with anger and her control slipping away, Sarah knew this meeting was only the beginning. The fight for Emily's birthday was far from over, but now, at least, they had a fighting chance. Just when Sarah felt like the fight was slipping away from her, a familiar face emerged from the shadows. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, a quiet, reserved woman who lived across the street and had always kept to herself. Sarah had exchanged pleasantries with her on a few occasions, but she had never truly known where Mrs. Rodriguez stood. She wasn't the type to stir the pot, always nodding politely at neighborhood gatherings and avoiding any form of confrontation. But tonight, as Sarah lingered in the dimly lit hallway of the community center, feeling the weight of defeat pressing down on her. Mrs. Rodriguez approached her with an air of quiet determination. "Sarah," Mrs. Rodriguez said softly, her voice low enough that only Sarah could hear. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Sarah turned, surprised to see her. "Of course, Mrs. Rodriguez," she replied, her voice cautious. "What's on your mind?" Mrs. Rodriguez glanced around to ensure no one was eavesdropping, then leaned in closer. "I've been watching this whole thing unfold, and I need you to know something. Karen isn't as untouchable as she seems. I've seen her bend the rules before, more than once. And it's time someone stepped up and stopped her." The words caught Sarah off guard. She had always thought of Karen as a force of nature, someone who could not be challenged without consequences. But Mrs. Rodriguez's calm demeanor suggested something entirely different. "What do you mean? How do you know that?" Sarah asked, her curiosity piqued. Mrs. Rodriguez took a deep breath, clearly reluctant but determined to speak. "You've probably noticed that Karen has her little favors, right? The way she gets special treatment from the HOA board, the way certain rules only seem to apply to some people and not others. Well, I'm one of the people she's targeted in the past. I was trying to get a small garden project approved in my yard, nothing big, just some flowers and a few shrubs, but Karen shot it down without even giving it a second glance." Sarah's eyebrows furrowed. "But why? What was her reasoning?" "She said it would interfere with the neighborhood aesthetic. But the real reason was that she didn't like me. I found out later that Karen had her eyes set on the plot of land near my house to build a gazebo for herself. She didn't want my garden competing with her idea, so she blocked mine outright." Mrs. Rodriguez paused, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "And then there was the time she told the board that I was violating the HOA's rules by leaving a chair on my porch for too long. She fined me for it, even though it wasn't in the rules. I had to fight her for months before they rescinded the fine, and I still had to deal with her cold stares every time I saw her after that." Sarah's mind raced as she processed the information. She had heard rumors over the years about Karen's manipulative tactics, but hearing this from someone who had experienced it firsthand was a revelation. "So she's been breaking the rules for her own gain?" Sarah asked, her voice steady but filled with disbelief. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded. "And she's been getting away with it for years because no one had the courage to stand up to her. People are scared of what she can do, of the way she controls everything in this neighborhood. But you're different. You're not afraid to fight for what's right. And that's why I'm telling you this. I can't sit back anymore and let her destroy people's lives." The weight of Mrs. Rodriguez's words settled into Sarah's chest, filling her with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time, she saw Karen not as an unstoppable force but as a bully who had used fear and manipulation to keep people under her thumb. And now, with this new information, Sarah had a real chance to take her down. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't know how much this means to me. To all of us." Mrs. Rodriguez gave her a small, tight smile. "I know it's not going to be easy, but if we all stand together, we can make things right. You've got the support of the people who are tired of Karen's rule. We just need to make sure we hit her where it hurts, her credibility. If we can prove that she's been using her position for personal gain, then maybe we can get the HOA board to take action." With a plan beginning to form in her mind, Sarah felt a surge of hope flood through her. The fight was far from over, but with this new ally, and the strength of the community behind her, she felt ready to face Karen head-on. The pieces were falling into place, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah believed that they could win this fight. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. And Emily's birthday might just be the victory that started it all. The morning of Emily's birthday arrived, bright and full of promise, but the looming threat of Karen hung over the family like a dark cloud. Sarah stood in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on the cake, the scent of vanilla and chocolate filling the air. Emily, in her wheelchair, sat at the table, excitedly bouncing up and down, her eyes sparkling as she helped her mother with the decorations. The house was buzzing with energy, the birthday banners fluttering above, and the sound of music softly playing in the background. It was perfect. Or it was supposed to be. Just as Sarah hung the last string of lights on the porch, she saw a familiar black car pull up outside. Her stomach dropped. She knew that car. It was Karen's. Before Sarah could even process what was happening, Karen stepped out of the car, her sharp gaze scanning the front yard. Sarah's pulse quickened, the excitement she had felt moments ago draining from her. Not today, Sarah muttered to herself, determination rising in her chest. She had already expected Karen's interference, but she hadn't prepared for what was coming next. Karen marched up the walkway, her footsteps purposeful and demanding. She didn't even knock. Without so much as a greeting, she walked straight through the door, her eyes scanning the party preparations like an intruder in her territory. "This party isn't happening," Karen said, her voice cold and authoritative. "You didn't follow the rules, and I won't stand for it." Sarah's heart raced, but she met Karen's gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "It's happening, Karen," she said, her voice steady. "Emily deserves this, and nothing you say is going to change that." Karen's lips curled into a tight smile, the kind that sent chills down Sarah's spine. "We'll see about that. If you go through with this, I'll call the police. Unauthorized gatherings are against the rules in this neighborhood, and I won't hesitate to make sure you're fined or arrested." Sarah's hands shook as she clenched them into fists, her knuckles white. "You can't do this, Karen. You're just trying to ruin Emily's day because you can. But I'm not afraid of you anymore." Karen's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. "You should be," she said, her tone dark and threatening. "I have the power to make your life miserable, Sarah. You've crossed a line. If you go ahead with this party, you'll regret it." For a moment, Sarah felt the weight of Karen's words, the old fear creeping back into her thoughts. She looked at Emily, sitting in her chair, waiting for the party to begin. Her daughter's smile, full of innocent joy, was the only thing that mattered in that moment. Without another word, Sarah turned to the front door, opened it wide, and stepped out onto the porch. "You don't control us anymore, Karen. This party is happening, and if you want to call the police, then go ahead. I'm not backing down." Karen stood frozen, her mouth agape, as if she couldn't believe Sarah's defiance. For the first time in a long while, Sarah could see a crack in Karen's carefully constructed armor. The smug superiority she had always worn was replaced by a flicker of doubt. "You're making a huge mistake," Karen finally said, her voice low, her composure beginning to slip. Sarah didn't flinch. She wasn't going to let Karen take anything else from her or her daughter. "No, Karen. You've made the mistake. And it ends today." Emily wheeled herself to the front door, looking up at Sarah with wide eyes. "Mommy, are we still having the party?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Sarah knelt down beside her, her heart swelling with love and pride. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly, brushing a lock of hair from Emily's face. "We're having the party. It's your special day, and no one is going to ruin it." As Karen stood there, staring in disbelief, Sarah took Emily's hand and led her back into the house, her head held high. The preparations continued, but now there was a new fire in Sarah's chest. This wasn't just about a birthday party anymore. It was about standing up to the injustice that had been plaguing their neighborhood for too long. And Sarah was no longer afraid. The breaking point had come, and she wasn't backing down. The day that had started with so much uncertainty was now overflowing with joy, laughter, and celebration. The front yard was alive with color, the same streamers and balloons that had once been a source of anxiety now fluttering happily in the warm afternoon breeze. The sound of children's laughter filled the air as Emily's friends, all gathered in the yard, chased each other around, their joyous screams echoing down the street. Sarah stood at the edge of the porch, watching the chaos unfold before her, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace, as though the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. After the countless sleepless nights, the stress, and the overwhelming doubt that had threatened to undo everything, Emily's birthday was finally happening. And it was perfect. Despite Karen's attempts to stop it, despite the threats and the manipulation, Sarah had stood her ground, and the party was a resounding success. Sarah's eyes flicked across the yard, meeting the gazes of the neighbors who had come together in support of Emily's special day. They were here, not out of obligation, but out of solidarity, out of a shared desire to push back against the fear that Karen had instilled in their neighborhood for so long. Mr. Wallace was chatting with Mrs. McAllister by the grill, their faces lit with smiles, while other neighbors, who had once been too afraid to speak out, mingled and laughed with each other as if they had known each other for years. The sense of unity was palpable, and for the first time, Sarah realized that this wasn't just a victory for Emily, it was a victory for the entire community. Emily, in her wheelchair, was the center of attention, surrounded by friends and family, as her father wheeled her to the table where the cake sat, waiting to be cut. The candles flickered in the afternoon sun, and Emily's eyes sparkled as she made her wish. When she blew them out, the crowd erupted into applause, and Emily's laughter rang out, sweet and pure. Sarah watched her daughter, her heart full, as Emily grinned widely and looked up at her mother. "Mommy, this is the best day ever." Emily's voice was full of wonder, and Sarah had to fight the tears that welled up in her eyes. She bent down, kissed Emily's cheek, and whispered, "I'm so glad, sweetheart. You deserve this and so much more." The moment felt like a culmination of everything Sarah had fought for, the courage to stand up to Karen, the bravery to fight back against the unfair rules that had kept her and her neighbors in fear. She had done it. They had done it. The celebration continued late into the afternoon, with music playing, children dancing, and the food and drinks flowing freely. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt like a place where people truly cared for one another, where unity and compassion had replaced the fear and division Karen had tried so hard to cultivate. But the real victory, for Sarah, came when she received a call from the HOA board. It was a few hours after the party had begun, and Sarah had almost forgotten about the impending consequences that Karen had threatened. The board members had seen the emails, the petitions, the support that Sarah had gathered from the community, and they had finally taken action. Karen's reign of fear was over. Sarah stood in the corner of the room, her phone pressed to her ear as the HOA representative explained that, after an investigation, the board had decided to remove Karen from her position as HOA president. The feeling of relief that washed over Sarah was indescribable, as if the last weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Karen would no longer have the power to intimidate anyone in their neighborhood. She was no longer in control. Sarah hung up the phone and looked around at the smiling faces of her friends and neighbors, who had all made this moment possible. She didn't need to say anything, they all knew. The fight had been long and hard, but they had won. Karen had lost. The neighborhood was free. The air felt different now, lighter, as if a long-standing tension had finally been released. The moment was a victory, not just for Emily and Sarah, but for everyone who had ever felt silenced or threatened by Karen's oppressive rule. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music filling the air, laughter spilling out from every corner, and Emily dancing with her friends under the twinkling lights that had been hung in the trees. Sarah stood beside her daughter, watching the happiness unfold, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to truly relax. She had fought for her daughter's happiness, for justice, and for the community. And now, they were all free. The sun was beginning to set as Sarah stood at the edge of the porch, looking out over the quiet neighborhood. The day had been a whirlwind of celebration, and as the last few guests left, Emily's laughter still echoed in her mind, a sound that was now etched into her heart forever. The weight that had hung over her family for so long, the fear, the uncertainty, had finally been lifted. Karen's departure from the HOA had marked the end of an era of control and manipulation, and in its place was a newfound sense of freedom and peace. Sarah felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not just because they had won, but because they had done it together. She glanced over at Emily, who was sitting on the porch swing with her father, both of them watching the stars slowly beginning to appear in the twilight sky. Emily was smiling, her face glowing with happiness, her eyes sparkling with the joy of a birthday well spent. For the first time in months, Sarah could breathe without feeling the weight of looming threats. This moment, this peace, was hard-earned. Sarah thought back to everything they had been through, the countless late nights spent worrying about the party, the pressure of facing Karen's cruelty, and the uncertainty of whether the community would ever rise up against her. But now, as she stood here with her family, the struggle felt like a distant memory. They had overcome it. Sarah had learned that standing up for what was right wasn't just about winning, it was about finding strength in unity, in the support of others, and in never giving up, no matter how daunting the challenge seemed. She smiled to herself, feeling the lessons of the past few weeks settle deep into her heart. She had taught Emily something far more important than any birthday party. She had taught her daughter that even when things seemed impossible, they could face anything as long as they stayed together. That lesson would stay with Emily for the rest of her life, shaping the woman she would grow up to be. As Sarah joined her husband and daughter on the porch, the three of them sat together in a comfortable silence. The air was cool, the sounds of the neighborhood settling down for the night, and everything felt right again. It was as though the neighborhood had been reborn, free from the oppressive grip of Karen's rule, and now, for the first time in a long time, they could all breathe easily. Sarah squeezed Emily's hand, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over her. "We did it," Sarah said softly, her voice full of emotion. "We really did it." Emily turned to her, her face glowing with pride. "We're not afraid anymore, Mommy." Sarah's heart swelled with pride, and she kissed the top of Emily's head. "No, we're not," she whispered. "And we never will be again." They sat together, looking out into the night, knowing that this was only the beginning. The future, once clouded with fear and uncertainty, now felt bright, full of endless possibilities. As the stars shone above them, Sarah realized that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them with strength, unity, and love. And that, in the end, was all they really needed. If you've been inspired by Sarah's journey and the incredible strength of the community, don't wait for change to happen, be the change. Stand up for what's right, support those who need it, and always fight for the happiness and freedom of those you love. Share this story with others, and let's create a world where no one has to face injustice alone. Whether it's standing up to authority or lending a helping hand to a neighbor, every action makes a difference. Take a stand today, and let's make our communities stronger, kinder, and more united.